Welcome back to this company day of presentations here at Erik Penser Bank. My name is Alexander Wilvall. I'm an equity research analyst here at Erik Penser Bank, covering Rottneros among other companies. And we now have the pleasure to welcome Lennart Eberleh, who is CEO of Rottneros. Rottneros is a Swedish market pulp producer with two mills here in Sweden. So welcome, Lennart.
Thank you very much, Alexander, and hello everybody. It's a great pleasure to be talking to you this way today. And if we jump right into the next slide, I will give you a brief overview of Rottneros is today. For those of you who have not followed us for the last couple of years or forever, we are a mid-cap listed company in Stockholm with a long history, but we are on the exchange since 1987. And today we have, as Alexander just said, two pulp mills. One is north of Stockholm, where we make long fiber chemical pulp in brown and white qualities. And the other one is in the western parts of Sweden, just north of Karlstad, the Rottneros mill, where we make mechanical pulp, CTMP, as well as groundwood. Since early 2000s, we have also invested a lot of time and effort into molded fiber packaging, previously under the name of Silvipack, and during the last years under the name of Rottneros Packaging. And we have now put all our competence and know-how into one new production line. I will talk about that a little bit later. As you might know, Rottneros is not having any forest of its own. So we have a well-established sourcing organization, which is sourcing the majority of the raw materials around our mills. But as a complement to that, we also have a logistics arms in the Baltics to be able to level out certain indiscrepancies in the Swedish raw material market. That came well in hand 2018, when it was a very hot summer and raw material was limited. We then went from roughly 15 to 20% of imports. And since the beginning of 2020, we also have a sourcing organization, which is sourcing wood from private forest owners by the name of Nyqvist Skogs, which is mainly active around the Rottneros mill. We have a total turnover of some 2 billion Swedish kroners. Last year, we made some 412,000 tons of pulp. After the Agenda 500, which was a major investment program over the years 15 to 18, we estimate that we have a capacity of 440,000 tons and a total of 318 very engaged employees. So if we take the next slide, I just want to briefly talk about our employees, who I believe are our most important asset. And we put a lot of effort into creating a joint foundation, both for our vision, our core values, as well as the business idea, which is driving us on a daily basis, both to keep our employees that we're having, develop them further, but also to work on our employee brand and be able to attract new people to come into this wonderful company. So on the next slide, we can briefly talk a little bit about the long-term targets that we've set in order to make sure that we are a sustainable company. We have a history that dates back to the late 1600s. First, this was an iron ore mill. Later, at the end of 1800, we started groundwood pulp production. And then in the beginning of 1900, the Vallvik mill was established. So with more than 100 years of history, we certainly want to make sure that this company remains, and that is basically what sustainability means. And sustainability that is covering both the social aspects, financial aspects, and also environmental aspects. So by 2030, our ambition and target is to be fossil free according to GHG scope 1 and 2. And I think that is probably one of the most important targets that we will put a lot of effort behind in the coming years. But of course, financial targets up and above that when it comes to paying dividends and be a good shareholder company. that is, of course, important for us as well. Next slide, please. So for you as an investor, why should you be looking into Rottneros? Well, certainly we are a part of the circular economy. We do have the forest as a natural and renewable resource that is collecting carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and puts it into growth of wood, which then can be utilized to make sawmills or as a raw material for sawmills, which we don't have, but we then also have sawmill chips, which is roughly half of the wood that goes into a sawmill. We have a very strong focus on niches. We have a huge variety of different pulp qualities that enables us to have a focus on long-standing customer relations with good ambition to continue those relations and have a joint growth going forward. And over the last years, we also have worked on a solid balance sheet, which certainly is important in a capital-intense industry like ours. So the target is to have an equity ratio of above 50%, and that we have maintained even through the pandemic during 2020. Next slide, please. So some words about the pulp market. As you know, we are basically a pure pulp player. And here you can see the development of the pulp price measured both in US dollars and Swedish kroners on a quarterly average. So this is for the first 6 months of this year, 2 measuring points. So the yellow line is the Swedish kroner development. And there we were at some 10,000 kroners, which is relatively high, but it has continued furthermore after that. And the blue line is in US dollars, which is the main currency in which pulp is traded around the globe. So in the next slide, we see a more fine distribution of the prices. Here it's the monthly prices. So in August now, we're coming close to the month, and we will see that the price for pulp this month is at an average of 1,340 US dollars in Europe. Which is a stable price. We entered August with the same price. But you also see here the staples, that is a measurement of the stock volume, and that has increased somewhat during the last month, mainly driven by that China had a small lack of demand. So China activity in the pulp market has gone down. That has been originally driving the reduction in stocks that you see there by the end of 2020, which have led to the price increase. But on the other side, Europe still is a very stable and strong market. So overall, this is both for long fiber and short fiber pulps. The long fiber stock value has gone to 42 days. That's 2 days up. And if you adjust it for seasonal variations, it's basically unchanged. And the long-term trend for long fiber is somewhere between 35 to 37 days. So it's a slight increase, and this is slightly above the long-term average. But it's a cyclical market. I think everybody knows that, and we have just recently, as you can see here in the blue line, experienced a very dramatic upswing in prices. And this is the listed price. It takes some time before those prices are working themselves into our P&L, so there's a certain lag. We've seen that lag also when prices were coming down towards the end of 19 and beginning of 20. We had an overhang there into the first quarter, and we will look into that when we compare quarter-over-quarter figures. But it's important to have that in mind, that there is a lag from listed prices into our realized prices. So if we take a review on the next slide, we see here pulp and paper production, not only for market pulp, but also integrated pulp and board and paper producers in Europe. Europe is our major market. Some 70% of our sales are into Europe. And you see here the graphical markets are negative, whereas the packaging markets are positive. And that overall has led to an increase of 1% January to April. These statistics are a bit lagging, But we have seen after that also some good movements especially in the graphical sector, which is currently experiencing quite a backswing from the very lows from 2020 and the effects of the pandemic. So overall, a continued increase in consumption of sustainable and renewable materials, which I think will play in our favor going forward. On the next slide, we can see how we sell our different pulp grades into various application areas. So on the left side, you see the various grades that we produce. ECF, that's white chemical pulp, UKP, that's brown chemical pulp, and then we have groundwood and CTMP and their share in our sales. And you can combine and use these qualities in a variety of different end users, and that is what makes Rottneros a somewhat special producer of specialty grades. We make more than 50 different qualities. We do a lot of customized and qualities that are produced to customer specifications, and that is certainly a signum of ours, so we can maintain a good volume and good sales into traditional markets such as Europe, and we're not too exposed to the more volatile Chinese or Asian markets. So on the next slide, you see a more clear picture on where we are selling. Board and packaging has certainly become the largest area of our pulp sales. Printing and writing is a stable segment with certain qualities like the groundwood, which are having unique properties, especially for very thin papers with a high opacity. But that is more of a standard application, whereas filter, electrotechnical, and special are areas where we are growing, where our pulp makes specific applications to our end users, to our customers. So it's a fairly wide distribution of sales, and that is somewhat a balancing factor when one segment is not as strong as another. So this is balancing out, and we have relatively stable sales over the years. So if we go into the next slide, we will have some words on the second quarter, and that was highlighted by a very strong pulp market that we've just seen. We had a very stable production in our units, and that has led to an improved result. We came up and out with 97 million Swedish kronor in EBIT, and we have also launched a new financing, and the result of that you could see earlier today with a statement from the board that is proposing to pay an extra dividend of 45 euros, and they will summon an extra shareholder meeting later on in a couple of weeks' time. And more in detail in the second quarter, you see here a waterfall between Q2 2020 and Q2 2021. And the result improvement has been driven by price and variable costs. Currency has been least so in our favor. So the price really was the most determining factor of this development. And if we look at the first half year on the next slide, you see also here quite a substantial improvement, and that price and currency is negative is due to the weakening or the stronger Swedish krona. In 2020 it was above 9 kronor, and here during the first half of this year it was around 8.50 to 8.60. So that has been offsetting the price increase that we've seen. But variable costs have come down. There is an excess of wood pulp and sawmill chips in the market. So we are at low prices, and we do not foresee any development there in the next coming months either. We're also working strong with our fixed costs, as that is an important part. But we have to remember that in 2020, the stop in Rottneros Mill was during the first half of the year, and this year the stop will be in the third quarter in September. And also quarter four will then be impacted by the stop in Vallvik. So we can go to the next slide. and look at the EBIT and EBITDA development over quarters. And you see here the impact both in Q4 19 and Q4 of 2020 of our maintenance stop in Vallvik, that is the big mill, but also how the pandemic has impacted, and what I talked earlier about the lag in prices, both in a downgoing market, Q1 2020 still with relative higher prices compared to the list price, but also here a lag in 2021 where it takes some time before higher prices are working themselves into our quarterly results. Next slide, please. A quick view on the balance sheet. You see here a strong cash flow generation throughout the years, and as a consequence of that, we have paid back our bond earlier than anticipated and went into a traditional bank financing, which has opened up for the possibility for the board to propose a extra dividend. Next slide, please. So what will happen with sustainable and renewable products going forward? Tissue certainly closely linked to the general development of the global population and a strong increase in available, more available money for consumers and increased living standards. We have seen a strong impact of e-commerce, and this is certainly driven also by the pandemic and an even stronger development there. Textiles will need to be made from renewable sources like viscose, and that will, if that ticks off, take away volumes from traditional paper pulp. We do not make any viscose, but this will balance out a little bit demand and supply. And of course, environmental sustainability issues are very high on the agenda. I think climate change is certainly something everybody thinks about. And the forest industry as such, with the raw material and our carbon footprint, is part of the solution, and this will drive demand for our products, especially also for packaging. So if we go forward, next slide, please. We have some words here on packaging that I've started off with as well. We are now in the phase of scaling up the technology that we have put together. It's not from the shelf technology. There's some 15 years of experience that we've put into developing tools and forms ourselves. Parts are off shelf, parts are, as I've said, our own technology. And we believe that going forward now, we will have to partner up to bring this in a larger scale into the market, because demand supersedes supply at this point very strongly. There are a lot of players out there, but I think the market is absolutely strong enough and big enough, and our main focus is on the highest barrier properties that you can achieve, and there we are second to none currently when it comes to modified atmosphere packaging. So next slide. Just very briefly summing up, we are currently seeing a strong pulp market. We have worked hard during the last years to have stable operations. We have worked also strongly to maintain a good balance sheet, and we feel that we have the power and resources to also develop the business of Rottneros up and beyond pulp, and here foremost into packaging. So with that, I'll leave the word back to Alexander and open up for some questions.
Okay, thank you, Lennart, for this presentation. I would like to ask you, you finished a bit here regarding Rottneros packaging and the R&D that you have done internally in order to create these products. Are there any other areas where you could see Rottneros moving sort of forward in the value chain aside from the packaging area?
No, currently that is really the main focus we have. There is, of course, a lot of R&D going on at universities around the world, how to utilize wood as a resource, as a renewable resource. But we do not have the power to maintain a large R&D department. We are all in all 318 people, and some of our major competitors have more than 100 engineers in one site just outside Stockholm. So we are working closely together with the universities. We are partnering up with startup companies to see what's going on and not to be left behind. But currently, packaging is what we focus on. We have to focus on one thing at a time to make sure it flies.
And regarding the different niches for your different products, can you explain how they differ? Are there any that are more stable when it comes to prices and other niches which are more susceptible to market fluctuations in the list prices and so on?
Well, I would say overall, there is a link between all our products to the list price of NBSK. Certainly the white part, the ECF, is more linked to that in the kind of deals that we make with our customers. On the brown side, for example, for electrotechnical or filter, there are pricing agreements in place that are not settling the price on a monthly basis, but sometimes even on a yearly basis. And that is also part of what part do we play in the supply chain. For example, in electrotechnical, that goes to cable papers, deep sea cables, or transformators. And those are long-running projects where our customers have to have visibility in the pricing of their raw materials. Mechanical pulp is in generally low in amplitude when it comes to the pricing variations, and also lower when it comes to the total price of NBSK. But here we talk more about quarterly or half-year prices. So the one that is mostly exposed to the fluctuation of the NBSK list price, that is our ECF grade, the white long fiber chemical pulp.
Okay. When it comes to the outlook now going into the autumn, as you mentioned, there is a lag of a couple of months, I guess, when it comes to prices and so on. So we probably will see that continuing to filter through into the P&L. But you showed a picture of the producer inventories, and we have seen somewhat of an uptick, even though, as you mentioned, when it is adjusted for seasonality, it's probably more flat. But when we look at some figures regarding Swedish pulp producers in specific, with the numbers from Swedish Konjunkturinstitutet, it seems that inventory levels are deemed to be very, very low. Would you still characterize the market as quite tight and in a stable sort of stable situation, not really reflecting an uptick in inventory levels? Is that a fair assessment?
The European market still is in a very good shape. Yeah. And Europe is our major market with some 70%. So I think we can also see that there are logistical issues around the world when it comes to container freights, and that has had an impact on where pulp is shipped and where it is consumed, and it has sort of safeguarded Europe from excess volumes that might have found their way into Europe on the basis of a weaker Chinese market. But in tradition, and generally, China does see an uptick after the summer now when we come into the autumn. Production usually ramps up there again. But certainly, Europe is in very good shape.
Okay, so
and from our customers.
A nice starting point going into the fall here and the end of the year, I assume, for you. Also, when it comes to on the cost side, when it comes to variable cost, the high activity rates when it comes to sawmills has obviously contributed to good supply when it comes to your input cost. Is that high activity, is that a situation that you see continuing into the fall here?
What we hear, and if we talk about the fall and the rest of the year, I would see that our input costs on wood will remain stable on this level that we have today.
Okay, and also lastly, I would just like to highlight the announcement that the board made today, which you mentioned regarding the extra dividend. Is this to be interpreted as something which is communicated on the basis of the current balance sheet, but based on the previous year's profitability, and not something which is well, what you say, should it be characterized as an extra dividend and looking forward as a sign of things to come, basically? Is that a fair assessment?
I think your first assessment was correct. It has to be seen as a result of the last 2 years. I mean, 2019 still was a very good year. 2020 was less so, but the combined result of those 2 years are strong, and the balance sheet has continued to be strong during the course of this year. And on the basis of the new financing, this gives us the opportunity to pick up dividend payments again.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Lennart. Looking forward to an exciting fall year, and best of luck going into the autumn. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.